A lifeless, nameless body of a newborn baby boy found abandoned and mangled on a remote, snowy country road.
I don't know how anybody could do that. It's awful.
Spurring a fight to find his identity, his parents, and his killer.
You do not have to give your name. Call and help us identify this infant.
A search that would span decades and a community that would never forget.
We will follow this to its conclusion.
26 years later, a big break thanks to new DNA technology and good old-fashioned police work.
What we ended up building was over 1,400 person family tree, and we had never done it before.
Eventually leading them to a woman who had moved on with her life, gotten married, raised 3 kids, taking them to a church camp just miles from where her baby had been found dead. Always looking over her shoulder for when this day would finally come.
You have any idea what we want to talk to you about?
It was about a baby.
Yeah. What about?
A baby that was left.
It's a crime so shocking it would forever change this community. For the first time, we show you never before seen video of the investigation. I'm Sarah Goldenberg. I'm taking you inside the case file in episode 1 of To Catch a Killer, Geauga's Child. About 30 miles east of Cleveland in Geauga County, you'll find countryside you can easily get lost in. A good place to bury secrets deep in the woods. But on one March day in 1993, this one was uncovered. A baby boy found dead on a gravel road in Thompson Township. So unrecognizable, some people pass by not even knowing this was a child.
Wish we could have found it alive.
But Cheryl Jenkins knew something wasn't right. Out delivering papers, she spotted the baby lying on Sidley Road.
Just hope they find who did it. I hope they're punished. Because there are a lot of people out there that want babies. They could have gave it up for adoption or something.
Her call to police set off a massive investigation. This never-seen-before footage shows investigators gently placed a white blanket over the baby's tiny body. They found this plastic bag down the road in the woods nearby.
Sheriff's Office.
Geauga County Sheriff George Red Simmons held a press conference that day.
And the body had suffered severe trauma and was missing limbs.
They set up a tip line and handed out flyers.
That anyone who has any information that might help us identify this infant.
The tragic story made headlines across Northeast Ohio.
Chief Deputy James Lengel says it's possible the boy had been run over by a car or mauled by an animal.
This is very tragic, very disgusting.
Deputies interviewed neighbors in the area, going door to door. They contacted police agencies across the state looking for any cases of missing infants, and reached out to hospitals requesting a list of all of the births in the last 3 months in 3 counties, Geauga, Lake, and Ashtabula.
Babies are very hard to identify, and we need information.
Detective Bureau.
Calls immediately started pouring into the tip line. We got a hold of hours of calls in the case file. At least 2 of them were from school bus drivers. They saw the baby on their bus routes that morning.
It was hard to determine if it was a stuffed baby doll or like a little stuffed animal.
So I went down in it and I looked and, wait a minute, that's a baby. And I thought, nah, that has to be a baby doll.
A mountainous amount of information to sift through. What was legitimate and what could lead detectives astray?
To love and care for this little child.
Days passed without many answers, and the community held a funeral for the baby boy, calling him Geauga's Child. Investigators hid in plain sight in the church parking lot, catching the people attending on camera.
Today's date is November 13th, 1993. The time is approximately 12:10 hours.
They zoomed in on the license plate of each car and the driver's face before they parked.
Adam Paul Lincoln.
That's a Geauga.
She's going into the church alone.
Investigators looked for a woman able to hide a pregnancy.
She's overweight.
Who's overweight?
That operation brought no answers, but investigators didn't stop there. They set up surveillance cameras in a few locations, including a camera aimed at some neighbors' houses, close to where the baby was found, but they didn't catch much movement. Meanwhile, the community, so touched by the tragedy, raised money for a headstone, placing it in Maple Grove Cemetery, not far from Sidley Road. On the back of the headstone, a poem reads, "Giaga's child lies here, now in safety, loved by many, just too late." So deputies set up a surveillance camera there too. The tapes show footage through snowstorms and clear days. Visitors brought flowers and toys. On what should have been the baby's first Christmas Eve, the headstone sat in silence in the snow. Years passed and investigators kept digging, but still no answers. A decade later, they got their hopes up again and tried to crack the case with new DNA technology. They checked a sample from the baby against suspects in a law enforcement database, but nothing turned up. Years continued to go by, and work on the case continued behind the scenes. It turns out detectives had several female suspects the public never heard about in the 2010s. They ruled them out with DNA one by one. In 2018, a break in an infamous cold case across the country gave them hope again.
The suspected Golden State Killer, 72-year-old James D'Angelo, appeared in court Friday. He's suspected of committing at least 12 murders, more than 50 rapes, and staging hundreds of break-ins going back to the 1970s.
Investigators use a new method called investigative genetic genealogy to track down the Golden State Killer. It's a new frontier for law enforcement and forensic scientists.
Actually, I was the first one to try it in 2011. I am the pioneer.
Colleen Fitzpatrick is president and founder of Identifinders International. She did not work on this case.
We find people. We do genetic genealogy and we identify people.
She solved 2 John and Jane Doe cases before investigators finally caught the Golden State Killer. Those cases brought this new investigative technique into the spotlight.
We get DNA from the crime lab, the law enforcement agency. We send it to the lab. The lab creates a data set or a profile, upload it to the database, and we look for matches. And then we do our Sudoku puzzle.
They use public genealogy databases to look for a match. Now, countless investigations like this are underway across the country.
I think it's going to continue. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. This is too effective a way of solving crimes.
Just a few years ago, not many law enforcement agencies had tried investigative genetic genealogy. Inspired by the Golden State Killer case, a new detective on Giaga's child decided to give it a try. 25 years after Giaga's child was found in 2018.
The Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office had kept tooth buds, DNA from those tooth buds from the baby, and that DNA was suitable for comparison.
Teeth, experts say, are the best source of DNA. Preserving evidence like that was ahead of its time.
That is very remarkable because in other cold cases that we have that we're still working on, the DNA is old technology, it's not suitable, or it's diluted, or multiple samples.
What Detective Don Seaman was looking for, identifying the parents of the baby, was like finding a needle in the haystack. But after getting their hopes up, another disappointment for detectives a month later.
The hits that would come up initially were very distant, like 3rd to 4th generation cousins.
The lab they worked with didn't find enough close family members to move forward.
Some cases they give you, here's your suspect, go get him. We didn't have that, so we had to do this all on our own.
But Detective Seaman didn't give up.
So I started looking at some of the genealogy sites like Ancestry, 23andMe. However, we could not submit the baby's DNA kit to those private sites. They won't let law enforcement submit cases like this to those private sites because of confidentiality.
Instead, they submitted the baby's DNA to GEDmatch, a public DNA comparison database used by many people interested in learning more about their ancestry. Over the next few months, Detective Seaman started painstakingly building a family tree for Giaga's child on the private genealogy sites. It would eventually hold the names of about 1,400 ancestors of the baby. One day, he tracked down the man who submitted the closest DNA match they could find on GEDmatch.
We did identify a family member very early on who, without him, we would not be here today.
Coming up, a Nebraska man becomes key to cracking the case.
And that was basically our ground zero to build that family tree.
And other clues from the baby's DNA, like his Middle Eastern ancestry, narrowed down his identity. One of the closest hits to Giaga's child in GEDmatch traced back to a man named Vernon Holden who lived in Omaha, Nebraska. So detectives gave him a call.
Hello? Hello, is this Mr. Holden?
Yes.
Mr. Holden, my name is Don Seaman.
It turns out Vernon had submitted his father-in-law's DNA to the site, and he was a third-generation cousin match to Giaga's child. Vernon offered to help build his father-in-law's family tree in more detail.
We're all trying to do everything we can, so with your help, hopefully we can get closer to some closure for this.
I can help. I'll try to help.
All right. I really appreciate it.
With Vernon's help, the family tree kept growing. So the DNA lies the groundwork, but you still have to go out there and do the regular, good old-fashioned police work.
At the end of the day, that's what solved this case, was good old-fashioned police work. It gives you leads, much like if somebody called in and gave us information, but you still have to go out to talk to people, you have to interview them. We built that family tree and then we started contacting folks, and they would tell us, well, you know, Sue is related to me and in the family tree too, and she's in Ancestry. So we would reach out to Sue and say, you know, explain to Sue the nature and then ask her to put her DNA from the private sites into GEDmatch so we could see the correlation.
GEDmatch compiles the DNA and ancestry information from other sites, but only if it's uploaded voluntarily. Most people were more than happy to help.
And that was very instrumental in taking that ocean, if you will, that family tree of 1,400 people down to a pond.
Detective Seaman had a clue from the baby's DNA profile that could help narrow things down. On one side of the family, he was of Middle Eastern descent, Lebanese.
But when you're working a case this big, this is all-consuming.
I can't tell you how much work we put into it. Again, we were talking to people all over the world, France, Lebanon, England, the different time zones. I would come in the middle of the night. I would use Google Translate to communicate with these people. I would get an email and get so excited because we found like a piece of the family tree or something, and I would come in the middle of the night and work on it. A lot of the people that were working night shift thought I was crazy, but we knew that we were heading down the right road and hoping that eventually we would be able to bring some resolution to this case.
But before that would happen, detectives hit a number of dead ends. Over and over, they kept striking out.
I remember getting excited, all of us, you know, hooting and hollering in the office on many occasions that we thought we had it figured out, just to find out that it was just another dead end, if you will, that it wasn't, you know, where we were trying to get to.
They interviewed new possible suspects and potential parents of the baby. One clue even led them back down Sidley Road, where Giaga's child was found. A family member remembered visiting her uncle who used to live there and his pregnant girlfriend for Thanksgiving in November 1992. But the baby was never born, and she never heard about it again.
We got some trash pulls. We got some DNA out of the trash, and he had a girlfriend that was pregnant at the time, no baby, and he was not the father. Another time that we thought we had it figured out, and we just didn't.
Still ahead, how a family's history with a church camp finally leads investigators to the identity of Giaga's child. Investigators are getting closer. They figured out Giaga's child was a grandchild of one of 10 siblings, but they didn't have a match so far to the baby. So detectives went to visit the only living possible grandparent.
His name was Harvey. Harvey was adopted outside of his family at a very young age. I think it was 3 to 6 months old. We didn't think we would ever identify Harvey.
That led them to a last name they hadn't seen in the family tree. His adopted last name, Eastwood. It was a big get. Harvey had 2 daughters, but he didn't seem to know where Geauga County even was.
And as we were leaving, he made a comment about that his kids and grandkids met their spouses at a camp. And that was kind of that moment where we turned around and said, Harvey, what camp? What are you talking about? You never told us about a camp. And he started giving us directions on how to get to that camp, which was leading right into Geauga County, Ashtabula County. He gave us the name of the camp, and my partner and I Googled it, that it was Camp Cannonia.
Just a mile away from where the baby was found dead in the road. Detectives then asked Harvey again whether either of his daughters dated a man of Middle Eastern descent.
He said, well, yeah, my daughter Gail, she married a guy, I think he's Lebanese. And that was when we knew that we had found what we were looking for. Ultimately, Harvey and his wife gave us DNA that day, and it came back 2 weeks later that they were the grandparents of Giaga's child.
A huge break in the case. The mother and father of Giaga's child finally identified. Their investigative work just had to be confirmed by DNA once again. Now that they had the name of Gail's husband, Mark Ritchie, investigators went back to the other side of the family tree and found the Ritchie last name linked to Giaga's child. There it was, 1,400 ancestors later, an enormous family tree, finally connecting the suspected father and mother to Giaga's child, leading to this moment deputies from Geauga County Sheriff's Office have been waiting for decades.
You have any idea what we want to talk to you about?
It was about a baby.
Yeah, what about?
A baby that was left.
Coming up, the confrontation and confession. A mother's horrifying secret uncovered more than 2 decades later. 26 years later, hundreds of man-hours, leads, and dead ends, and the day had finally come. Gail Eastwood Ritchie's borrowed time was up.
Listen, Geauga County Sheriff's Office. We just want to see if we could talk to you for a couple minutes.
In May 2019, 2 detectives approached Gail in her driveway in Euclid. This is the view from one of their body cameras.
You have any idea what we want to talk to you about? Because I kind of think you might.
It was about a baby.
Yeah, what about?
A baby that was left.
Mm-hmm. We're not here to judge you, Gail. We don't know what was going on at the time. We don't want to speculate either, okay? So I don't think you want us to speculate. We're not here to arrest you. We are here to take your DNA, and we would like for you to tell us your side of the story.
Gail's expression doesn't change much.
I think after 26 years, it's time. Don't you? It's had to be weighing on you.
Again, silence, but detectives mean business.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a copy of the warrant, okay? This is your copy to keep.
They swab her mouth for DNA.
What this does is just collect some stem cells from the inside of your mouth.
Coming up, a confession 26 years in the making.
I wasn't sure what to do. No one knew.
A husband blindsided.
So my wife said this?
Mm-hmm. So
that's news to me.
And what else is Gail hiding?
Is there any other pregnancies or children?
No.
I'm Sarah Goldenberg. That's next on episode 2 of To Catch a Killer, Giaga's Child. A break in a cold case 26 years later.
That was when we knew that we had found what we were looking for.
A baby boy found dead and abandoned on a snowy country road in 1993.
I don't know how anyone could do that. It's awful.
New DNA technology leading detectives to his killer, his own mother, who dumped his body not far from her church camp.
You have any idea what we want to talk to you about?
It was about a baby.
Yeah, what about?
A baby that was left.
In episode 1, detectives just confronted Gail Eastwood Ritchie and took a DNA sample. Inside the interrogation room, the truth begins to come out. What happened to her baby more than 2 decades ago? I'm Sarah Goldenberg. You're watching episode 2 of To Catch a Killer, Giaga's Child. In May 2019, Detective Don Seaman sits down across from Gail Eastwood Ritchie, a woman he spent hundreds of hours building a family tree from DNA hits to track down.
I want to be sure you're okay. There's some tissues there for you.
Gail tells them she was 23 when she got pregnant with her now husband Mark, who was a few years older. For months, she said she didn't even know she was pregnant.
I wasn't sure what to do. No one knew.
She was living with her parents at the time and nannying for a family in Shaker Heights. That's where she says she had the baby. A warning, what comes next is disturbing. We've edited this part for time and clarity.
I was waiting for them to come home from school. I hadn't been feeling well at all that day. The next thing I knew, I was giving birth to a baby in the toilet. I didn't know what to do. The only thing I could think of was to put the baby in a bag. I have no idea what the sex was. I never looked at it. I took it out to my car and placed it in the trunk. And I cleaned up the bathroom.
Was the baby still in a bag at that time? Or did you put it in something else?
But
Like a garbage bag?
mm-hmm. Went on with the rest of the evening with the kids. And then I went home.
Several days later, she can't remember, maybe a whole week, Gail says she went to her church's youth group at a camp in Geneva with the baby dead in her trunk. From there, she drove a few miles to Thompson Township, where the baby would later be found.
Just ended up stopping on a road. I don't know which road. And I took the bag out of the trunk and I laid it in the woods. I didn't know what to do.
Was anybody with you in the car?
No, I was by myself.
She doesn't remember how far she walked before dumping her child's body.
I do remember a lot of snow, and I walked in as far as I could, and I left the bag.
You know that the baby was born alive.
I don't remember. I don't recall it ever crying.
Okay. But it's not like it was stillborn or anything. I mean, the coroner's report shows that it actually was breathing.
Okay.
So at some point, there had to be something kind of that you heard or saw. I mean, the baby had to be moving or...
It's possible. I don't remember.
Detectives sense she's not telling them everything. Gail says she never heard the baby cry and never cut the child's umbilical cord. But these details aren't adding up with the autopsy.
The coroner's report can show that the baby was born alive.
Okay.
And that the baby had taken breaths.
Okay.
So that tells me that the baby was moving and there had to be some type of screaming or something that you heard or saw.
It's possible, but I really don't remember it ever making a sound.
Gail guesses she had the baby in January of 1993.
So you're confident that Mark is the father?
Mark's the father, yeah.
Gail shows no emotion over the baby, who she calls it, and she never expresses regret for what she did.
You didn't know what to do. Was it because you were young, because you weren't married? You're afraid to tell your parents? I understand you're Baptist.
I was definitely afraid to tell my parents.
Gail says she hid the pregnancy from Mark at 200 to 230 pounds. She said it wasn't that difficult.
And I wasn't sure if we'd get married. I was always afraid of losing him.
So you would rather lose a child than take the risk of losing Mark, to the only man that's ever loved you.
Investigators continue to interrogate Gail Eastwood Ritchie at the Geauga County Sheriff's Office. At the same time, about 20 miles away in Euclid, deputies pay a visit to her husband, Mark Ritchie.
Mark Ritchie?
Yes.
How you doing, sir? We're detectives with the Geauga County Sheriff's Office.
Okay.
We just have to talk to you about some stuff.
At the time, Gail and Mark Ritchie had been married for 25 years and had 3 adult children together. Mark has no idea what's happening with his wife back at the sheriff's office.
My other partner and I, we've been, for the last year, like I said, we've been trying to identify this baby in the family. So, obviously, from 1993, we've had DNA. We get DNA, we try it, no good. And eventually we just ran out of places to go.
They lead him through their work on the baby's family tree, which eventually led them to Mark's father-in-law, Harvey.
We were able to track the DNA to descendants of like Harvey and above, going way back to 1809.
Investigators were looking for any coincidences they could find. Who was out in Geauga County in 1993 that could have left this baby?
Harvey tells us about Camp Koinonia.
Camp Koinonia.
Koinonia, and how his daughters went there.
Yeah.
So naturally, we got interested. We took DNA from Harvey and from Nancy. And the child is 99.9% their grandchild. So that leaves Gail,
Nancy too?
Harvey and Nancy, 99.9% their grandchild. So that says Gail or Nancy.
And then he reveals the reason they're here.
Today we met with Gail, and Gail said that our detectives that she's talked to today are the only two she's ever talked to about birthing a child in Shaker Heights, putting it into a garbage bag, and driving it to Geauga County. So
my wife said this?
Mm-hmm. So
that's news to me.
At some point in June of 1992, or roundabouts, you guys got together and had, she got pregnant. And for whatever reason, she kept it from you. And in March of 1993, she gave birth to that baby. And for whatever reason that we're still trying to figure out, she didn't tell anybody, and she left that baby in Geauga County.
Wow. I have I don't know what to say.
I mean, we don't know what to say either. It's been 26 years in the making. We've been everywhere and done everything. We've gone as far as Alabama to get DNA, and it's actually ended up.
This doesn't sound like my wife. I just don't believe it. But what am I going to do? How do I argue the science, right?
Coming up, is Mark's shock genuine?
I find it hard to believe that my wife would have kept something like that from me.
Detectives have to ask him one important question before they can rule him out as a suspect too. At this point, detectives are pretty sure Gail kept the pregnancy, the murder, and the abandonment of her baby to herself. But they have to ask her husband, Mark, that question.
So that's why, if there is anything that's going to come out that shows that you have prior knowledge, now would be the best time just to make sure.
No, I'm telling you, dude, I got nothing.
Okay.
I'm doing my best to not fall off my chair in shock.
Detectives seem convinced after questioning him some more. Before they leave, they ask for his DNA sample.
You know how we said 99% for the grandparents? Now we're going to get 100% to prove that you are the father.
Meanwhile, Gail is still under interrogation, and her lies are about to unravel.
Had you ever been pregnant prior to this pregnancy?
No.
Because your husband had indicated that he was aware that you were pregnant at some point.
Mark remembered Gail being pregnant and telling him she miscarried between 1992 and 93 before Geauga's child was born.
So you've for sure only been pregnant 3 times in your life?
I had a miscarriage before the twins, but we were married then.
Something else is baffling investigators.
Did you ever follow or read any stories or anything, in the news, or see any news clipping, stories or anything like that about anything?
I did not.
No.
I did not know the baby was found.
Detectives have a hard time believing Gail since it was such a high-profile case, and something else seems strange to them. They know Gail went back to that church camp year after year, bringing her children there as they grew up.
How does that make you feel when you go out there? Doesn't bother you?
I just go to camp.
I saw it was somewhere close by. That doesn't kindle those memories, or?
It hadn't, no.
No, it's something you've just left in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Another murder of an innocent baby. Detectives learned Giaga's child was not Gail Eastwood Ritchie's first victim. I'm Sarah Goldenberg. That part of the story next. Several hours into Gail's interrogation, investigators check on how she's doing. She tells them she thought about ending her life that day. They promised to get her a counselor to talk to, but the interrogation isn't over yet. Detectives tell Gail her DNA sample is about to go into CODIS, a national DNA database law enforcement and crime labs use to store and compare DNA profiles of criminal suspects and unidentified people. They give her one last chance to come clean on anything else she may be hiding.
You know and I know this isn't the only time. That there's more times that this has happened. And now is the time that you need to tell us about those, Gail. How many other times has this happened?
One other time.
One other time?
Their suspicion was right. Gail didn't just kill and dump Giaga's child. Another innocent baby had fallen victim too. Another pregnancy hidden from Mark before Giaga's child was born in 1991. Gail was 20 years old at the time. She says she went into labor at Mark's rental house in Cuyahoga County. A warning, this may be disturbing.
I did the same thing. Put it in a garbage bag.
And what did you do with the garbage bag?
I left it.
What do you mean you left it? What does that mean, Gail?
I took it and left it over by medical buildings in Euclid.
Another baby discarded like a piece of trash. Gail says she doesn't remember much, including if the child was a boy or a girl, but she does say the baby was full term.
Was the baby moving in the bag?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? Do you not remember, or do you just kind of block that out of your memory?
I really don't remember.
But Gail does remember where she abandoned this baby and cooperates with investigators.
If we gave you a piece of paper, can you kind of draw the area where you left the baby?
Detectives sadly aren't surprised to hear this confession.
Did you ever think about any names for these children?
No.
No? You didn't want to? Because you didn't want them?
Yes, no.
They make sure there aren't any other cases they need to know about.
Suspect stuff?
Nothing to anyone else, no.
Just these two children?
More than 4 hours later, detectives finally have their confession from Gail Eastwood Ritchie, the mother of Giaga's child.
I'm sorry.
What was her demeanor like during the confession?
She was very cold, in my opinion. Really not a lot of emotion, and she said she never really thought about him again. That the first time she thought about those children was when her father, Harvey, told her that we had visited him. So 26 years later was the first time she thought about those children again, which I just couldn't believe.
Now that detectives have their confession, the answer a community has been waiting for years. A mother behind bars and justice for Giaga's child. Finally, 26 years later, Geauga County Sheriff Scott Hildenbrand announces an arrest for the murder of Giaga's child.
She admitted that she had birthed the child, placed him in a trash bag, and left him in a wooded area. And I don't know how you could wake up the next morning like that, let alone 26 years later, and raise a family and go on like a normal person. I don't know how you do that.
Please respect our privacy. We have no comment at this time.
Gail pleaded not guilty to murder and aggravated murder of her own child. At trial in March 2022, the defense claimed Giaga's child was not born alive. Was Giaga's child a stillborn baby?
There is indication that it breathed on its own.
The only evidence prosecutors had was 3 samples of the baby's lung tissue.
And so that's why it's a live birth that was had given the opportunity, may have lived a full life.
Experts on both sides argued back and forth over whether or not the child actually took a breath.
We do not know the cause of death. That statement is a recognition of potential, but it's also a recognition that we don't really know the cause of death.
Gail never took the stand in her defense. 4 days later, a verdict.
On count 2, the charge of murder is guilty.
And soon after, harsh words from the judge as he sentenced Gail Eastwood Ritchie to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 15 years.
Ultimately, you gained that time on the back of a helpless infant whose body you concealed in the woods. Ironically, Jaga's child did more for you than you ever did for him, probably.
It was a cold case detectives never gave up on, helped along by advances in science and DNA technology. But it took more than DNA to solve the case.
I think the case always could have been solved, but the genealogy portion of it just basically gave us leads that we were able to follow through with and then ultimately led us to Gail.
The case isn't closed yet. Gail Eastwood Ritchie's attorney is in the process of appealing her conviction.
I felt that the state, frankly, did not have enough evidence to meet their burden of proof.
We still have no answers in the death of Gail and Mark's other baby, but Euclid police say without a body, the case is inactive. Giaga's child, that baby boy who touched the lives of so many who never knew him, would be 29 years old if he was alive today. I'm Sarah Goldenberg. Thanks for watching. You can catch our entire special on demand on our streaming platforms.